Advanced TV Herstory, where hearty discussion of all things TV draws a smart circle around lessons of leadership, persistence, and achievement. Every time you tune in, you'll find fresh perspectives and dots that get connected to reveal just how powerful TV is to women and how important it is that we're represented. Oh wait, find this podcast wherever you listen to others, plus Spotify, Pandora, and YouTube. Okay, on with the show.
Oh, the life lessons we learn from TV. Lessons of diligence, courage, teamwork, and believing in yourself. This is incredible stuff delivered in the most powerful storytelling medium in the world, television. And it needs to continue to be part of our shared experience if we're going to advance as people of the world. At the request of a longtime listener, this is a refresh of a podcast episode produced back in 2016 about Anita Hill. When I produced it 3 years ago, sexual harassment was sort of a back burner issue. It simmered.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Thurmond, members of the committee, my name is Anita F. Hill, and I am a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma.
Now, just as the initial episode stood for 3 years, and it held its own, we will again look at the most basic elements of an event that changed the lives of women around the world. The Hill-Thomas hearings of 1991 form the foundation of what we're living today, from the #MeToo movement to women from all walks of life coming forward to speak up about their workplace experience. The audio contained in this episode enables every listener to focus on Hill's words and tone.
My purpose was to, as clearly as possible, tell the Senate about behavior that I had experienced at the hand of Clarence Thomas. I couldn't say, oh, well, I'm going to prove sexual harassment. I couldn't do that. I could say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell what happened to me.
The writers of Herstory are creating a whole new chapter around sexual harassment, which neither begins nor ends with the courage and message of Anita Hill when she took the stand to testify as a witness in Washington, D.C., these 28 years ago. It's foundational knowledge, however, it's a seminal moment. In October 1991, Professor Hill appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee in opposition to the nomination of Clarence Thomas to the U.S. Supreme Court. Televised on C-SPAN, Hill told her story of being a young lawyer in Washington in 2 government offices in which Thomas was her boss. The obvious lesson we're learning with every new headline today is that sometimes that which is difficult to do is essential for the greater good. Truth can be painful, even more so to relive, to share on national TV, worldwide TV, and then to be scolded and intimidated by a group of powerful white men seated at the table, or perhaps in your own experience within your own company's management. But for this exercise, we'll review Hill's testimony, the exchanges that she had with both Democrat and Republican senators, and a clip of Hill 2 decades later about why it was all worth it. But first, listeners, some more background, because this gets to the point of how it is that the Supreme Court and the nominations process has become so political. In July 1991, President George H.W. Bush nominated Clarence Thomas, who at that time was a judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals, to succeed Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Now, you may recall that Marshall had been the first African American on the High Court, and Thomas would only be the second. A nominee to the Supreme Court is fully appointed through a majority vote of the U.S. Senate, which in 1991 held a Democratic majority. Prior to that vote, the Senate Judiciary Committee conducts a hearing, while behind the scenes the FBI and other agencies vet the nominee. For a candidate such as Thomas, his earlier appointment to the Court of Appeals just 18 months earlier should have made his vetting simpler. But this was a time that, the Supreme Court nominations had hit a particularly contentious reception with the public and the Senate, because back in 1987, Judge Robert Bork had been nominated to the High Court by President Reagan, and C-SPAN and cable TV's 24-hour news cycle, which was at that point just sort of starting to hit its stride, was hard at work conducting its own vetting of Judge Bork in the court of public opinion. And Judge Bork, Imagine a resume that includes that he was instrumental in firing the Watergate special prosecutor who had requested President Nixon's tapes. That whole experience with Watergate, you should have expected that in 1987, that was a bit of an uphill battle for Judge Bork. Bork's nomination was defeated by an orchestrated onslaught of telephone calls and letters and demonstrations. Remember, this was long before the internet, long before social media, long before hashtag movements. This is a glaring moment in history, however, that helps you to understand the growing power of messaging and of political strategists using very selected, targeted media and constituencies to engage in the political process. So in the case of Judge Clarence Thomas, Bush, who had been president under Reagan, he did not want this to become another Bork. The Bush operatives weren't going to play Mr. Nice Guy this time. They knew what to expect. And decades later, Anita Hill reflects candidly on that point. We'll get to that in a minute. So as you'll hear from her statement, Professor Hill was contacted by, and I say this in quotes, a member of the Judiciary Committee. She did not come forward herself. She was asked to provide a statement regarding her experience in working for Thomas nearly a decade earlier. 3 months after President Bush had announced that Thomas was his candidate for the court, the committee convened. The media had become aware of Professor Hill's statement. That was actually leaked. And so it was with tremendous fanfare that C-SPAN, only C-SPAN, aired the entire testimony that comprised Judge Thomas's hearing. Now, listeners, complain all you want about cable TV, but without C-SPAN, which is the acronym for, did you know this? Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network, well, transparency wouldn't be what it is today. In the early 1980s, the New York Times praised it for its entry into areas that were once shielded from public view. And sometimes it's painfully dry. You know, you've all surfed past it. But in 1991, all eyes were on C-SPAN coverage. Now, my disclaimer to you as we replay some of this audio is that having watched it in my late 20s, I found rewatching the hours of testimony to be incredibly painful. My respect, however, for Professor Hill has only grown. Respect for her composure, for her morals, and my disdain for the table of men accorded power by the people through their elected office, accountable to the people in their home states, that they could denigrate and intimidate a citizen who didn't invite this upon herself. That disdain has multiplied exponentially, and even more so from 2016 when I originally wrote these words. So you will be hard-pressed to find a woman who remembers the testimony of Anita Hill and the news that doesn't shiver just a bit. And the recent Kavanaugh hearings and Christine Blasey and how she was treated, well, that has now just become another chapter. Find excellent montages and the entire testimony from Hill and Thomas on YouTube. This is original herstory. It's hard to watch, but turn it on while you're cleaning your bathroom and you will never have a better shine, I swear. C-SPAN gave it to us real time, and with the Kavanaugh hearings of 2019, TV brought another section to this chapter. So to fully appreciate Christine Blasey's courage, you need to understand what America saw and heard in 1991 and how it shattered recognition of lack of progress, that the 80s were all for naught. The story is best told by Hill herself in her statement, which you should know is ranked as approximately number 69 in American Rhetoric's top 100 speeches of the 20th century. And that's according to Wikipedia. Professor Hill.
Welcome. We're happy that you are here, and let us stand and be sworn, if you will. Professor, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Professor Hill, please make whatever statement you would wish to make to the committee.
Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, friend. I instruct the officers, do not let anyone in or out of that door while Professor Hill is making her statement.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Thurmond, members of the committee, my name is Anita F. Hill, and I am a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. I was born on a farm in Okmulgee County, Oklahoma in 1956. I am the youngest of 13 children. I had my early education in Okmulgee County. My father, Albert Hill, is a farmer in that area. My mother's name is Irma Hill. She is also a farmer and a housewife. My childhood was one of a lot of hard work and not much money, but it was one of solid family affection as represented by my parents. I was reared in a religious atmosphere in the Baptist faith, and I have been a member of the Antioch Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma since 1983. It is a very warm part of my life at the present time. For my undergraduate work, I went to Oklahoma State University and graduated from there in 1977. I am attaching to this statement a copy of my resume for further details of my education. I graduated from the university with academic honors and proceeded to the Yale Law School, where I received my JD degree in 1980. Upon graduation from law school, I became a practicing lawyer with the Washington, D.C. firm of Wald, Harkrader and Ross. In 1981, I was introduced to now Judge Thomas by a mutual friend. Judge Thomas told me that he was anticipating a political appointment, and he asked if I would be interested in working with him. He was, in fact, appointed as Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights. After he had taken that post, he asked if I would become his assistant, and I accepted that position. In my early period there, I had two major projects. The first was an article I wrote for Judge Thomas's signature on the education of minority students. The second was the organization of a seminar on high-risk students, which was abandoned because Judge Thomas transferred to the EEOC, where he became the chairman of that office. During this period at the Department of Education, my working relationship with Judge Thomas was positive. I had a good deal of responsibility and independence. I thought he respected my work and that he trusted my judgment. After approximately 3 months of working there, he asked me to go out socially with him. What happened next and telling the world about it are the two most difficult experiences of my life. It is only after a great deal of agonizing consideration and great number of sleepless nights that I am able to talk of these unpleasant matters to anyone but my close friends. I declined the invitation to go out socially with him and explained to him that I thought it would jeopardize what at the time I considered to be a very good working relationship. I had a normal social life with other men outside of the office. I believed then, as now, that having a social relationship with a person who was supervising my work would be ill-advised. I was very uncomfortable with the idea and told him so.
What's not to believe about this woman's credibility? Following her statement, her family was ushered into the hearing room because they had been delayed in getting to the building and then needed to get in during a break. Wearing a conservative teal jacket and likely a matching black skirt of some sort, Professor Hill gained confidence in her cadence. Listen for that. And there are moments when you can hear her pause. Her upbringing didn't prepare her to discuss pornography, oral sex, any man's endowment, or a man's prowess or sex with animals with anyone, let alone her boss, or a table of powerful white men, or millions of viewers. Has yours? Mine didn't. Back to Hill.
I thought that by saying no and explaining my reasons, my employer would abandon his social suggestions. However, to my regret, in the following few weeks, he continued to ask me out on several occasions. He pressed me to justify my reasons for saying no to him. These incidents took place in his office or mine. They were in the form of private conversations which would not have been overheard by anyone else. My working relationship became even more strained when Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex. On these occasions, he would call me into his office for reports on education issues and projects Or he might suggest that because of the time pressures of his schedule, we go to lunch to a government cafeteria. After a brief discussion of work, he would turn the conversation to a discussion of sexual matters. His conversations were very vivid. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as women having sex with animals and films showing group sex or rape scenes. He talked about pornographic materials depicting individuals with large penises or large breasts involved in various sex acts. On several occasions, Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess. Because I was extremely uncomfortable talking about sex with him at all, and particularly in such a graphic way, I told him that I did not want to talk about these subjects. I would also try to change the subject to education matters or to non-sexual personal matters, such as his background or his beliefs. My efforts to change the subject were rarely successful. Throughout the period of these conversations, he also from time to time asked me for social engagements. My reaction to these conversations was to avoid them by eliminating opportunities for us to engage in extended conversations. This was difficult because at the time I was his only assistant at the Office of Education, or Office for Civil Rights. During the latter part of my time at the Department of Education, the social pressures and any conversation of his offensive behavior ended. I began both to believe and hope that our working relationship could be a proper, cordial, and professional one. When Judge Thomas was made chair of the EEOC, I needed to face the question of whether to go with him. I was asked to do so, and I did. The work itself was interesting, and at that time it appeared that the sexual overtures which had so troubled me had ended. I also faced the realistic fact that I had no alternative job. While I might have gone back to private practice, perhaps in my old firm or at another, I was dedicated to civil rights work, and my first choice was to be in that field. Moreover, at that time, the Department of Education itself was a dubious venture. President Reagan was seeking to abolish the entire department. For my first months at the EEOC, where I continued to be an assistant to Judge Thomas, there were no sexual conversations or overtures. However, during the fall and winter of 1982, these began again. The comments were random, ranged from pressing me about why I didn't go out with him to remarks about my personal appearance. I remember his saying that someday I would have to tell him the real reason that I wouldn't go out with him.
Remember everything your mother told you about your reputation? It's that byproduct of raising our daughters and sons to believe that harassment is invited by the victim, not an action perpetrated by someone as a power move. Changing this in language, law, and action will take longer than our lifetimes, I fear. Again, it's that whole mind shift that we're now starting to realize, and that certainly Law and Order SVU has helped us to recognize, that harassment is not invited, that harassment is an action perpetrated by someone as a power move. So for an African American woman who was of working class parents to attend college and law school and hold a position as a law professor in 1991, that was a big deal. She was a role model for women of all colors. I remember that. She had chosen government work, which was toiling in policy to level playing fields for children, teachers, and later government employees. Hill recounted some of the most unpleasant moments of her career on national television that went worldwide, and it was a field that was anything but level.
He began to show displeasure in his tone and voice, and his demeanor, and his continued pressure for an explanation. He commented on what I was wearing in terms of whether it made me more or less sexually attractive. The incidents occurred in his inner office at the EEOC. One of the oddest episodes I remember was an occasion in which Thomas was drinking a Coke in his office. He got up from the table at which we were working, went over to his desk to get the Coke, looked at the can and asked, "Who has put pubic hair on my Coke?" On other occasions, he referred to the size of his own penis as being larger than normal, and he also spoke on some occasions of the pleasures he had given to women with oral sex. At this point, late 1982, I began to feel severe stress on the job. I began to be concerned that Clarence Thomas might take out his anger with me by degrading me or not giving me important assignments. I also thought that he might find an excuse for dismissing me. In January of 1983, I began looking for another job. I was handicapped because I feared that if he found out, he might make it difficult for me to find other employment, and I might be dismissed from the job I had. Another factor that made my search more difficult was that there was a period, this was during a period of a hiring freeze in the government. In February 1983, I was hospitalized for 5 days on an emergency basis for acute stomach pain, which I attributed to stress on the job. Once out of the hospital, I became more committed to find other employment and sought further to minimize my contact with Thomas. This became easier when Allison Duncan became office director, because most of my work was then funneled through her, and I had contact with Clarence Thomas mostly in staff meetings. In the spring of 1983, an opportunity to teach at Oral Roberts University opened up. I participated in a seminar, taught an afternoon session in a seminar at Oral Roberts University. The dean of the university saw me teaching and inquired as to whether I would be interested in pursuing a career in teaching, beginning at Oral Roberts University. I agreed to take the job, in large part because of my desire to escape the pressures I felt at the EEOC due to Judge Thomas. When I informed him that I was leaving in July, I recall that his response was that now I would no longer have an excuse for not going out with him. I told him that I still preferred not to do so. At some time after that meeting, he asked if he could take me to dinner at the end of the term. When I declined, he assured me that the dinner was a professional courtesy only and not a social invitation. I reluctantly agreed to accept that invitation, but only if it was at the very end of a working day. On, as I recall, the last day of my employment at the EEOC in the summer of 1983, I did have dinner with Clarence Thomas. We went directly from work to a restaurant near the office. We talked about the work I had done, both at education and at the EEOC. He told me that he was pleased with all of it, except for an article and speech that I had done for him while we were at the Office for Civil Rights. Finally, he made a comment that I will vividly remember. He said that if I ever told anyone of his behavior, that it would ruin his career. This was not an apology, nor was it an explanation. That was his last remark about the possibility of our going out or reference to his behavior.
In her 1997 memoir, Speaking Truth to Power, Hill tells of the process by which she wrote and sent the statement to her contact at the Senate Judiciary Committee, and her legal mind is so evident in how she phrased the statement and how she read it to the world.
In July of 1983, I left Washington, D.C. area, and have had minimal contacts with Judge Clarence Thomas since. I am, of course, aware from the press that some questions have been raised about conversations I had with Judge Clarence Thomas after I left the EEOC. From 1983 until today, I have seen Judge Thomas only twice. On one occasion, I needed to get a reference from him, and on another, he made a public appearance in Tulsa. On one occasion, he called me at home and we had an inconsequential conversation. On one occasion, he called me without reaching me, and I returned the call without reaching him, and nothing came of it. I have, on at least 3 occasions, been asked to act as a conduit to him for others. I knew his secretary, Diane Holt. We had worked together at both EEOC and Education. There were occasions on which I spoke to her, and on some of these occasions, undoubtedly, I passed on some casual comment to then Chairman Thomas. There were a series of calls in the first 3 months of 1985, occasioned by a group in Tulsa, which wished to have a civil rights conference. They wanted Judge Thomas to be the speaker and enlisted my assistance for this purpose. I did call in January and February to no effect, and finally suggested to the person directly involved that she put the matter into her own hands and call directly. She did so in March of 1985. In connection with that March invitation, Ms. Cahall wanted conference materials for the seminar, and some research was needed. I was asked to try to get the information and did attempt to do so. There was another call about another possible conference in July of 1985. In August of 1987, I was in Washington, D.C., and I did call Diane Holt. In the course of this conversation, she asked me how long I was going to be in town, and I told her. It is recorded in the message as August 15th. It was, in fact, August 20th. She told me about Judge Thomas's marriage, and I did say, congratulate him. It is only after a great deal of agonizing consideration that I am able to talk of these unpleasant matters to anyone except my closest friends. As I've said before, these last few days have been very trying and very hard for me. And it hasn't just been the last few days this week. It has actually been over a month now that I have been under the strain of this issue. Telling the world is the most difficult experience of my life, but it is very close to having to live through the experience that occasioned this meeting. I may have used poor judgment early on in my relationship with this issue. I was aware, however, that telling at any point in my career could adversely affect my future career. And I did not want early on to burn all the bridges to the EEOC. As I said, I may have used poor judgment. Perhaps I should have taken angry or even militant steps, both when I was in the agency or after I left it. But I must confess to the world that the course that I took seemed the better as well as the easier approach. I declined any comment to newspapers, but later when Senate staff asked me about these matters, I felt I had a duty to report. I have no personal vendetta against Clarence Thomas. I seek only to provide the committee with information which it may regard as relevant. It would have been more comfortable to remain silent. It took no initiative to inform anyone. I took no initiative to inform anyone. But when I was asked by a representative of this committee to report my experience, I felt that I had to tell the truth. I could not keep silent.
So there you have it. No motivation to take this to any public level until she was asked to do so, in light of Thomas's nomination to the highest court in the United States. Now, she's an officer of the court and a professor to aspiring lawyers. Had she declined to come forward, sexism and sexual harassment would have continued to prevail. We would not be where we are today. We can only admire both her courage as well as her impeccable resume and delivery as the proverbial well-placed pump that kept the door ajar just long enough for America to sit up, take notice, and change. Now, there's a follow-up episode to this podcast that explores the TV Herstory timeline that followed Hill's 1991 testimony, and it reminds us just how long it has taken to change conditions in the workplace, as we have seen it become so much more a prominent topic of social change today. Okay, now for the hardest part, some of the inquiry, and I don't go too far into this because, there are documentaries, there's a lot that you can explore about what all happened following her initial testimony. But let's just say that it was all conducted by the members of the United States Senate, who at that time, all members of that committee were men. Yes. And Professor Hill gave everyone in America the playbook on how to manage an untenable situation when it was happening and how to recount it years later. Her appearance and testimony literally changed lives, as she recounted in a 2014 interview with CBS This Morning.
In so many ways, because of the attention it brought, because of the thousands of letters that I have from people around talking about what the experiences meant to them in their workplaces. In 1991, or since 1991, we've come to terms with the fact that, yes, sexual harassment is wrong, and it does matter, and it exists, it's prevalent. But we still haven't figured out exactly what to do about it. And so, in addition to my career as a professor, and as an educator, and as a lawyer, I've been able to go out and try to help people understand how we can move forward and what we do need to do about it.
To listen to the hearing is to understand that men in power had no way to understand Anita Hill's experience. We hadn't had a national public dialogue about sexual harassment. It had sort of been a comical flavor in sitcoms. There'd been lawsuits. There'd been some legislation. But like I said, it had simmered. Many of these senators, these men who were asking her questions, were in fact lawyers themselves, and they used that background and experience to shift their roles from prosecutors of her statement and memory to judges. They got to have it both ways because the rules weren't very well enforced. In fact, her memoir detailed the lack of framework to the hearing itself, one that neither followed Senate customs and rules or courtroom standards, like about evidence. And some senators on that panel were assigned the task of destroying her credibility. That's all they did. That was their job. They had people researching stuff. They were pulling headlines and never, ever vetting their sources. And they proceeded to question her until they got the answers which proved that they were the smartest ones in the room. That's how it worked back in 1991. Now, her memoir, written a few years after all of it, it also documents the other women who had come forward with similar claims and the process which left their voices out of the conversation about Thomas's fitness for the highest court in the land. Again, Anita Hill ended up being prosecuted for everything she was saying, and yet everything she was saying was being brought forth simply to question a man's fitness to serve a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court. And at that hearing table, and the visual images are burned in our memory, the only thing that separated the male perspective from Republican and Democrat was the aggression. Former Vice President Joe Biden chaired the committee as the senator from Delaware. And at times he was very gracious. But he also asked questions that should strike you as gratuitous or even salacious, such as asking her to recite, for the record, Thomas's comments to her, and making a big deal about having to introduce her family. Every step he took was a reminder of who in that room had power and who didn't. Now, in part 2 of this updated look at the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings and TV's role in Me Too, I'll go deeper into Biden's handling as committee chair of a host of details that show disregard for the process and the fairness and the sensitive nature of the conversation that she was willing to have in public. Oh, but next came the Republican Senator Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania. And on paper, Arlen Specter should have not been as bad as he was. He was a pro-choice Republican in the Senate up until 2009, when the GOP pretty much ditched him. And he was also the former district attorney in Philadelphia, and he really was the very worst. I give Professor Hill all the credit in the world for making it through each of his turns at the microphone, that she did it without throwing up, without walking out, without screaming, without becoming that angry black woman that they were all taunting her to become.
You said that you were concerned that Judge Thomas might take it out on me by downgrading me or by not giving me important assignments. I also thought that he might find an excuse for dismissing me. As an experienced attorney and as someone who was in the field of handling sexual harassment cases, didn't it cross your mind that if you needed to defend yourself from what you anticipated he might do, that your evidentiary position would be much stronger if you had made some notes?
No, it did not.
Well, why not?
I don't know why it didn't cross my mind.
Well, the law of evidence is that notes are very important. You're nodding yes. Is present recollection refreshed, right?
Yes, indeed.
Prior recollection recorded, right?
Yes.
In a controversy, if Judge Thomas took some action against you and you had to defend yourself on the ground that he was being malicious in retaliation for your turning him down, wouldn't those notes be very influential, if not determinative, in enabling you to establish your legal position?
I think they would be very influential, yes.
So given your experience, if all this happened, since all this happened, why not make the notes?
Well, it might have been a good choice to make the notes. I did not do it, though. Maybe I made the wrong choice in not making the notes. I'm not a person, I was not interested in any litigation. I was not interested. If I had been dismissed, very likely I would have just gone out and tried to find another job. I was not interested in filing a claim against him, and perhaps that's why it did not occur to me to make notes about it.
Well, I'm not on the point of your being interested in making a claim. What I am on the point of is your statement that you were concerned that he might take retaliatory action against you, and therefore the inference arises that the notes would have been something which would have been done by an experienced lawyer.
One of the things that I did do at that time was to document my work. I went through very meticulously with every assignment that I was given. This was this really was in response to the concerns that I had about being fired. I went through, I logged in every work assignment that I received, the date that it was received, the action that was requested, the action that I took on it, the date that it went out. So that I did do that in order to protect myself. But I did not write down any of the comments or conversations.
Well, when you comment about documenting your work to protect yourself because of concern of being fired, wouldn't the same precise thought about documentation have led you to document Judge Thomas's statements to you?
Well, I was documenting my work so that I could show to a new employer that I had, in fact, done these things.
Yes, Specter asked numerous questions, often rambling. His statements leading up to sort of questions were in reference to documents that weren't vetted or shared with Hill's team. His wandering remarks that led up to some sort of a question often required Hill's close attention. You can see her. The camera is scrutinizing her facial expressions to follow whatever it is he's trying to ask. And without fail, bless Anita Hill, she let him prattle on for a few minutes, and then with a very straight face and earnest voice, she would ask, "Could you be more clear? I don't understand what you're asking." Essentially, Hill returned each volley with precision. Point Hill. In this clip that follows, Specter attempts to undermine her credibility through a statement provided by the Dean of Oral Roberts University Law School, one of her previous employers, who was a white man at a conservative private institution. Through an unfounded statement provided by the Dean of Oral Roberts University Law School, a white man at a conservative private institution.
I'll ask you about one statement of Charles Cothey, Dean Cothey, because he knew you and Judge Thomas very well. I want to ask you for your comment on it. There's a similar reference in the Doggett statement, which I'm not going to ask you about because you haven't read the Doggett statement and you say you do not remember him, and out of fairness, I want to give you a chance to read that first. But you do know Dean Cothey, and he does know Judge Thomas, and this is his concluding statement, quote, "I find the references to the alleged sexual harassment not only unbelievable, but preposterous. I'm convinced that such are the product of fantasy," close quote. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, I would only say that I'm not given to fantasy. This is not something that I would have come forward with if I were not absolutely sure about what it is I am saying. I weighed this very carefully, I considered it carefully, and I made a determination to come forward. I think it's unfortunate that that comment was made by a man who purports to be someone who says he knows me. And I think it's just inaccurate.
Well, you have added during the course of your testimony today 2 new witnesses whom you made this complaint to. When you talked to the FBI, there was 1 witness. And you're testifying today that you're now, quote, recalling more, that you had repressed a lot. And the question which I have for you is, how reliable is your testimony in October of 1991 on events that occurred 8-10 years ago, when you are adding new factors, explaining them by saying you have repressed a lot, and in the context of a sexual harassment charge where the federal law is very firm on a 6-month period of limitation, how sure can you expect this committee to be on the accuracy of your statements?
Well, I think if you start to look at each individual problem with the statement, then you're not going to be satisfied that it's true. But I think the statement has to be taken as a whole. There is nothing in the statement that, or nothing in my background, nothing in my statement, there is no motivation that would show that I would make up something like this. And I guess one really does have to understand something about the nature of sexual harassment. It is very difficult for people to come forward with these things, these kinds of things. And it wasn't as though I rushed forward with this information. I can only tell you what happened, to the best of my recollection, what occurred, and ask you to take that into account. Now, you have to make your own judgment about it from there on, but I do want you to take into account the whole thing.
Now, this is the fuzzy memory that most American women who live through these long weeks of herstory remember about the hearings. But amazingly, back to this 2014 CBS This Morning interview conducted by Gayle King and Charlie Rose. Oh, listeners, yes, that Charlie Rose, who since May 2018 has himself been in the headlines as more than 30 women employed at CBS have alleged sexual harassment by Charlie Rose. But seriously, Rose asks the question with a straight face, and Hill, she just had to endure it.
I absolutely understood that they were going to ask questions, but the level of outside incidents of press conferences and statements about me that were made by people who were on the committee, I think were so far beyond what I expected to happen. I expected to be able to give my testimony, for them to ask probing questions, because I really wanted people to understand exactly what had happened. But I didn't think that all of the outside campaigning that was done against my testimony by the people who were supposed to be determining what the truth was appropriate.
But now when you look back, having just said that, do you think the hearings were fair when you look back at it today?
No, I don't. I don't think they were fair because, again, the people who were the finders of fact, the triers of truth, were outside campaigning against me. Yeah. And so you cannot have a fair, it would be like having a judge on a judicial panel outside giving press conferences about one of the witnesses. You can't have a fair hearing.
But the questions from those senators was unfair? Or?
The questions themselves were not fair. They were ill-informed questions. They were drawing on myths and things that had not been proven, that no one had sworn to, the statements that I don't even know that they were even accurate statements. Senator Simpson said that he had letters and faxes, but when asked to present them, he refused to present them. So I don't even know if those things were in fact true.
You know, Anita, I was in college at the time.
Listeners, now you know what you need to about Anita Hill to hold your own in a hostile conversation. Find the hours of material on YouTube. Watch it. It's essential listening and viewing. Read Hill's works about the hearings and sexual harassment and gender issues in her 1995 work, Race, Gender, and Power in America, The Legacy of the Hill-Thomas Hearings. It's an excellent book. It's co-edited by Hill herself and Emma Coleman Jordan. Seriously, it's as relevant today as it was 24 years ago. Now, through the years, Hill has continued the work she loves and to be a voice for professional women, for women of all backgrounds who face steep odds. Her 1997 memoir, Speaking Truth to Power, documents the Clarence Thomas matter as well as all of her interest in civil and human rights. She is a legal thinker. She is a philosopher of sorts. Hill is quoted as saying, quote, "I resent the idea that people would blame the messenger for the message rather than looking at the content of the message itself." And that's ultimately what we're talking about with regard to violence and harassment and bullying. We spend too much time paying attention, negative attention, to the person who raises the matter rather than to the perpetrator. Through the power of television, this message indeed needs to sink into the fabric of the American experience and, by extension, the world. It has all changed us. Sexuality, rape culture, victims' rights, evidence, even the existence of a show like Law & Order SVU. Where would we be without Anita Hill and her courage?
Civil rights law that was passed in 1991, for the first time, women, when they proved their claims, were able to fully recover. That
Damages.
was fully recover the damages, the losses that they had suffered. That was monumental. But, you know, as important as the women running for Congress and the greater attention that we had with women going forward and filing complaints, were the public conversations and the private conversations that people had with their own family members, stories that they had never shared before. And our ability to talk about the issue as a society has moved because of those conversations.
They say because of you. People say because of you, Anita Hill, that girls today know that sexual harassment is not okay and that they can do something about it.
Thanks for listening to this important segment of Advanced TV Herstory. There's a lot to absorb. I agree. Audio has been pulled from the CBS This Morning interview of 2014, conducted by Gayle King and Charlie Rose. The statements of Anita Hill through the 1991 hearings are all available on YouTube as well. For more information about Advanced TV Herstory, go to our website, tvherstory.com. Once you're there, you can sign up for our newsletter, which comes out about every month. You can also find our social media handles, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Or you can use an opportunity to send us a note with your ideas about other topics for future podcast episodes or your thoughts on the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearings, the Kavanaugh hearings, any of it. Big appreciation to Catherine Yang, our audio editor, for all of her good work in piecing together these very, very heavy clips. This is a fascinating episode to produce, and I appreciate all of her good work. Finally, I am so grateful to you, the listeners of Advanced TV Herstory. We've been together now for 4 years, through a lot of change, through a lot of social conversation, And I'm hopeful that you find that this podcast makes you better informed and more compassionate to both those who are working for social change and understanding of those who are still very much fearing it. It's all about power. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.